Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. If you saw my prior video about the 2026 Michigan governor's race, this video focuses on the other part of the article which talks about the Michigan Senate race in 2026. So without missing anything, here it goes. The article begins by saying that Mike Rogers, the Republican U.S. Senate nominee from 2024, was the most familiar to Michigan voters, carrying a 75% name identification among those polled, having just ran and narrowly lost the U.S. Senate race in 2024 to then U.S. Representative Elisa Slotkin, who won by a little more than 19,000 votes. Among the voters polled, Rogers carried a favorable ID among 23% of voters, an unfavorable ID among 22% of voters, while 31% said they had no opinion of him. U.S. Representative Haley Stevens, the Democrat from Birmingham, was the second most familiar candidate to voters, garnering recognition among 41% of voters, with 14% carrying a favorable opinion, 7% carrying unfavorable, and 20% having no opinion. When looking specifically at Democratic voters, former Wayne County Health Director Abdul El-Sayed, who ran for governor in 2018, carried the largest name ID at 44%, with 17% of voters offering a favorable view. While Stevens carried a similar name ID among Democrats, 43%, she received a favorable assessment from a larger share of voters at 25%. State Senator Mallory McMorrow, a third Democrat in this race, was identified by 30% of voters, with 15% of Democrats offering a favorable opinion. Among Republicans, Rogers by far carried the highest name recognition at 77.3%, with 41% viewing him favorably. Comparatively, U.S. Representative Bill Huizenga, a Republican rep from Zeeland, told reporters at the end of April he was leaning towards a run for Senate, carried a 33% name ID, with 13% of Republicans carrying a positive opinion of him. This article does mention the matchups for Senate between the Republicans and Democrats, but I do have the Wikipedia page up, which does show it in a little bit more graphically pleasing way, so I'm just going to show this now. It shows here two parts of the poll. The top part is just like all voters. The second part is among definite voters. So the first part for Haley Stevens versus Mike Rogers showed Stevens with a 1-point lead over Mike Rogers, 45% to 44%, with 11% of the vote saying they are other or undecided. Among definite voters, Stevens has a larger lead at 49%, Rogers has 43%, and then other undecided is 8%. That is the only poll from this matchup. Target Insight from back in March does show Rogers leading 41-35, but that had a lot more undecided vote at 24%. In the matchup of Abdul El-Sayed versus Mike Rogers, in this poll, Mike Rogers actually has a larger amount of support than he does against Haley Stevens, where he starts out with 47%, Abdul El-Sayed starts out with 41%. Among definite voters, Sayed's numbers go up to 45%, Rogers remains consistent at 47%. So in this matchup, Rogers starts at 6%, and after definite, he has a 2% lead. Other undecided, 12%, 8% undecided in the second part of the poll. So it seems like there's less undecided vote, or actually there's more undecided vote for Rogers versus Sayed than there is for Rogers versus Stevens, but then come definite voters, there's the same amount of undecided vote, but Rogers gets 4% more, and Sayed gets about 4% less than what Haley Stevens was able to get. And then for Mallory McMorrow versus Mike Rogers, this definitely seems like a matchup that could potentially be competitive, but Rogers starts out with a 4-point lead over McMorrow, 46% to 42%, with 12% undecided, but when it's definite voters, McMorrow leads 46% to 44% with 10% undecided. So based on this poll and everything that it says, it shows that Mike Rogers versus Abdul El-Sayed right now at this point in time would be the most favorable matchup for the Republican Mike Rogers, and based on these early numbers, could result in the Republicans electing a senator from the state of Michigan. Whereas Mallory McMorrow against Mike Rogers, one poll shows Rogers with an early lead, but when definite voters are factored in and some of that undecided 2% is taken away, it then becomes 46-44 for McMorrow versus Rogers. Stevens versus Mike Rogers, which right now seems to be the most likeliest outcome, given that Haley Stevens has the highest name recognition among Democrats, unless other Democrats enter the race. Right now, it's about a 1-point race between Stevens and Rogers. This is kind of similar to what we saw with Elisa Slotkin versus Mike Rogers, where it was a very close race in the early polling and leading into Election Day. As for the candidates right now, there are 4 candidates in the race: Abdul El-Sayed, Mallory McMorrow, Haley Stevens, and U.S. or State Representative Joe Tate, who joined the race after the poll was conducted. Two other Democrats have expressed interest in State Senator Sarah Anthony and Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel. If Nessel were to enter, I would argue she starts out probably as the favorite, seeing as Michigan Attorney General is likely the highest name recognition office, even more so than U.S. Representative Haley Stevens, but that's a conversation for a later day if Nessel does join the race. On the Republican side of things, there are three Republicans running. The most notable is Mike Rogers, the former U.S. Representative and nominee for U.S. Senate in 2024. Right now, we're waiting for three other Republicans, Tudor Dixon, Bill Huizenga, and Lorenzo Sewell, all of which have expressed interest in potentially running for this race. Of the three, Bill Huizenga has been the most talked about and I would say 100% more likely to enter this race. Of the three, that should be coming any day now, that announcement of him entering this race. So it may become Rogers versus Huizenga. We'll have to wait and see how that all plays out. As for the general election, Cook Politico, Inside Elections, and Sabra Crystal Ball have this race listed as a toss-up. Race to the White House has it listed as tilt Democrat. And when you look at the 2026 Senate race or 2024 Senate race, it makes sense. Slotkin defeated Mike Rogers by 0.34% in 2024 in a very close race. Seeing as Mike Rogers is expected to be the Republican nominee again, it makes sense this race would be starting out as a toss-up. It should be worth noting that on the same ballot, Donald Trump did win the state of Michigan by 1.4%, Trump getting 49.73% of the vote, whereas on the Senate side of things, Rogers lost with 48.3%. Lisa Slotkin was able to get 48.64%. So this could be an argument where Rogers, based on percentages here in his respective race, ran about 1.4% behind what Donald Trump was able to do in the race. In 2026, however, it will be a Democratic favored midterm year, and Donald Trump will not be at the top of the ticket to drive voter turnout in the state of Michigan. And there's been a problem for Republicans in recent years. When Donald Trump is not at the top of the ticket, a lot of Republican voters do not come out to vote like they do when Trump is at the top of the ballot, and that could hurt Republicans down ballot. So while Mike Rogers only lost by 0.34% in 2024, the Senate race in 2020, which also had Trump at the top of the ballot, John James lost to Gary Peters by 1.7%. The last Senate race where Donald Trump was not at the top of the ballot was 2018, where Debbie Stabenow won against John James by 6.5%. And if you're concerned about, well, this was also, say, while Donald Trump, he just won in 2016. He just won the state by 0.22%. So even though it was less Republican than it in 2016 and 2018 than it is now, Michigan did still vote for Donald Trump just 2 years prior. And in that Senate election, we did see the Democrat win by a likely Democratic margin. Now, I don't think that's going to happen again in 2026, but the 2018 midterm environment, which ended up being a great night for Democrats, is probably what 2026 is more likely to be like than, say, 2022, which was supposed to be a Republican midterm year, ended up being pretty even given Roe v. Wade and its overturning and everything in that regard, and 2024, which ended up being a very great night for the Republicans at the presidential level, and a very good night for them at the Senate level, where they picked up Senate seats in Montana, Ohio, West Virginia, and very narrowly in Pennsylvania, including narrowly picking up Senate seats in Michigan and Wisconsin, Nevada, and Arizona. So Republicans had a great night in 2024. 2026 suggests this should be the Democrats' turn to have a very good night. Right now, the generic vote currently has Democrats up by 2.6%. This isn't a very massive number to be up by 2.6%, but it's also only June of 2025. I expect this number will probably grow from now until November of 2026. As for the Senate map right now, I just did a video on South Carolina, but for the Michigan Senate race right now, Michigan's one of the closest Senate races in the country. It's among the 4 or 5 Senate seats that I think are the most closely watched right now and most likely to be battleground states at this time. It'd be easy just to say, well, in 2024, we saw Michigan go tilt Democrat for Lisa Slotkin over Mike Rogers and just say that'll happen again. But I do think given the election environment being a little bit more friendly to the Democrats, I actually think Michigan goes into the lean Democratic category when everything is said and done. I think around a 2.5% victory for the Democrat over the Republican in this race is currently what I'm forecasting the Senate race to be at this time. I do think Mike Rogers will be the Republican nominee. As for who the Democrats nominate, it's either going to be Haley Stevens or Dana Nessel, depending on if she declares for this race or not. I think those two are the most likely to be the Democratic candidate at this time. And I do think come election day, the Democrats will win by about 2.5%, in large part due to the fact that it's a midterm election where less Republicans will be turning out without Donald Trump at the top of the ticket. I'm interested to hear what you think. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe to my channel if you really enjoyed it. And thank you so much for watching.